This is Dr. Toby Moma. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our show this week. You don't want to miss Chaplain Tanya Jefferson. Tanya Jefferson trained as an accountant, and after her career as an accountant, went back to seminary and got a master's in divinity, and afterwards spent a 2-year period in residency in the Veteran Affairs Hospital. Chaplain Jefferson is a trained, certified chaplain who works at the Jackson Veteran Affairs Hospital. She's going to share with you her burden for the veterans and how she ministers to them in the midst of PTSD, in the midst of distress, in the midst of trauma, in the midst of chronic medical illnesses. She's going to be sharing a part of her life about how she was raised in the Delta in Belzoni and how God has brought her thus far. You don't want to miss this interview. She's a female, she's a chaplain, and she's ministering to our veterans from a Christian perspective. You will be blessed. Jesus is Lord. Amen. We have a special guest on the show, Chaplain Tanya Jefferson. Chaplain Tanya Jefferson went to some of the best schools in the United States. She trained in her chaplaincy training in the VA in Jackson for her residency, and then she did some other training in seminary where she got a master's in divinity. Before that, she was an accountant. And we just wanted to talk to her today because we in this ministry, Faith and Power Ministries, have a love for the veterans. We love our veterans, and we believe that the veterans are the reason why we enjoy the freedom we have today. But do you realize that there are people in those hospitals who take time out to go out and seek how to help those veterans benefit from their optimal help? One of those people is Chaplain Tanya Jefferson. You're welcome on the show. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All the way from Belzoni, Mississippi.
Yes, the catfish capital of the world.
Welcome to our show today, and I'm privileged to have you on the show. Give us a little background on yourself. I mean, where were you raised, and how did you end up in Jackson at the VA? Just give us a little 50, 30, 20-year synopsis of your life, if I may say so.
20 years. Okay. Well, I grew up in Belzoni, Mississippi on my grandparents' farm, which is down in the Mississippi Delta.
Okay.
And I was there until 18 in Belzoni. Then I went off to school at Tougaloo College,
Okay.
which is a historically black college and university. And after finishing Tougaloo, I wanted to give back to my community, so I took a position at Jackson Hines Comprehensive Health Center. I have always been interested in health and bridging the gap between faith and health. So I took a position there, and I stayed there about 4.5 years, and then I just one day just decided, okay, I want to relocate to Atlanta with my older brother. And so
What were you doing at the Comprehensive Center?
I was working in the accounting department and also human resources.
So you trained as an accountant at Tougaloo.
At Tougaloo.
Okay.
Yes, my bachelor's is in economics with the emphasis in business administration. So I took some accounting classes. So after college, I worked human resources, payroll, and then from there I became an accountant.
Awesome, awesome. What was your experience like in the community health center?
It was, so I was in the administration building. So I was surrounded by, it was my first job out of college. I was surrounded by young women who, well, not young women, women of wisdom who thought I had been in the military because I've always been firm and direct. But they taught me there that it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And my mother had always said, think before you speak. So being surrounded by that wisdom, I learned that it's not what you say, it's how you say it, and it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And so that experience, it was grant funded. So sometime we waited for a grant grant funds to come in, but it was actually my second job because while in college, I worked at the post office. And so during the post office, for a minute, I was working at the post office and Jackson Hines Comprehensive Health Center. And the post office offered me a transitional employee position, and I didn't take it because, and it was at the time, that was like 93. It was going to pay like $12.72 an hour. So that was good money.
Then, right.
And my mom thought something was wrong with me because I left the post office. I was like, I don't think this is where I want to be. I want to still give back to health care. And so I took the position at Jackson Hines, only making $7.43 an hour. But it wasn't about the money. It was more about me having that desire to make a difference in health care.
At that time, you were living in Jackson.
I was living in Jackson. I actually stayed with my grandmother's niece for about 4.5 years. And it was like having my grandmother, even though my grandmother was deceased, but they were so much alike. They were.
Where was your dad in the picture all that growing up time?
My dad had passed when I was like 14 years old, early on in 1985. And it's funny you asked me about my dad. My dad turned 100 on June 24th.
2 days ago.
2 days ago. And so him leaving out of my life at an early age, I felt abandoned, even though it was out of his control, or I didn't feel like it was out of his control at the time because he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. Wow. And I'll never forget when my mom brought us in to sit us down at the table to tell us my 2 brothers was upset, but I had an emotion of anger. And I hit the table like those blank cigarettes. So he hadn't passed yet. But you hear stage 4 cancer, and you're in the Mississippi Delta. He was back then they didn't have all the technology and the treatment that they have now. So his survival rate, he didn't live very long. I felt abandoned because I was a daddy's girl.
And you were the oldest?
No, I'm not the oldest. Okay. I grew up with in the house. I grew up with my brother Cedric, which is deceased. I was the middle, and my younger brother Trevelyan. But we also had another brother in the Mississippi State Hospital in Jackson, Mississippi, which my grandmother and mother made sure we knew that he was part of our family. So we would go visit him sometime every Saturday or every other Saturday. And I learned that the ministry of presence, I didn't even know the term then, but I learned the ministry of presence sitting with my brother. And we also had an extended family there where it was my grandmother's niece, and she had children. So we would always visit them, so they were part of the family. But my dad also, my mother was his second marriage. So he had 3 other daughters that I grew up in. They were old enough to be my mother, but they was my sister, and I always made sure that I told them, "You're sister, not mother." And so one lived in Phoenix, Arizona, which she still lives now. Another in Texas, and one more in Belzoni, Mississippi, where she has organized a D'Ovalent museum for the community that I grew up in on my grandparents' farm. And so she preserved that history because my community where I grew up, D'Ovalent, it means God's willing. And it was founded by 2 African-American men from Ohio who wanted to change the course of their destiny. So they sold the land. They only sold the land to African-Americans. And so the community is mostly African-American and a few Caucasians. But that community it was God's will for them to establish that community, and people have land there.
Wow.
So
Because it was rare in those days for African Americans to own land.
right, right.
So those Ohio brothers came down,
Yes.
bought land,
Mhm.
and sold it to African Americans.
Yes, yes.
Like your granddad.
Yes, like my granddad and my grandmother. Yes.
Wow.
And the land is of significance in our family, and most of the families that live on D'Evelyn, in the D'Evelyn community, the land has value. And we
Wow.
work the land. I grew up working hard. You didn't really have much TV. I think we only got 2 channels. So we were either gardening or we were working in the field, the cotton fields, because
Wow.
cotton is a big industry in the Mississippi Delta.
right.
But now, since I moved away, it's more, I see more cornfields, and they rotate the crops. They rotated the crops back then, but it was more of cotton
So
or beans.
You were about to tell us that one day you just woke up and decided to leave Jackson. You said 4.5 years after
Yes.
being at Jackson Hines. You said there was a day you just made a decision. What happened?
What happened? I think I was frustrated with working there. I wanted to make a difference, and I really don't think I was enjoying what I was doing. And all I know, when my mother would ask me, what you want to be when you grow up, I said, I just want to help people. And she would ask a second question, how are you going to help people, because that's broad. And so I feel like I wasn't helping or making a difference. And so I would always be complaining to my brother that was living in Atlanta. And he said, why don't you give Atlanta a try? If you can't make it here, you can't make it anywhere. So that's what got me to Atlanta. And I didn't have a job. I didn't have any responsibilities.
You just had your degree.
I just had a degree and a car. And I think what really made me go, because I had started a master's a year after undergrad, only because my mother wanted me to go on and pursue a master's from
public
undergrad
health.
in public health.
Wow.
And she said, go on from undergrad. And I was like, I need a break. I've been working at the post office. I need a mental break. And she was like, if you stop, you won't want to go back. And so I think I only went to the University of Southern Mississippi briefly to show her that I was going to go back. Because my mother, even today, my mother is still in my head about a lot of things. I'm not saying I did everything she told me to do, but I can say she was accurate once you stop and start working, juggling life.
It
We
doesn't-
didn't. I didn't know how good I had it, because I used to say, "Oh, I can't wait till I get grown." But grown came with responsibilities. I remember saying it as a child. I can't wait till I get grown, but grown comes with responsibilities. And so leaving, I always left the program, and I said, I'm the grad school dropout. And so let's fast forward to me returning to the Masters of Public Health. I had gone on a mission trip. My mother was sick in 2009, and shortly after the mission trip, I came to the Mississippi Delta in a Delta hospital that my mother described as Band-Aid Station Number 2. I'm not going to call the name of the hospital. And so we checked her out the hospital. And so I was like, okay, Lord, I have a desire to be married, but do you want me to do missions full time? I was struggling with my call. And I said, okay, if I never get married, I'll just go back to Mississippi and make a difference in rural health care. So I started the Masters of Public Health at School of Rollins, Emory School of Rollins. And during that time, the School of Divinity was placed in my spirit. And the person who told me, I was like, God has never said that to me.
But you were working as an accountant.
I was still working as an accountant.
Okay.
But I knew
that wasn't your calling.
that wasn't my calling. And you know how you're good at something. I was good with numbers.
Right.
Very good with numbers. But I felt trapped.
So that's what we say. Your calling is what you're made for. Your job is what you're paid for.
Right.
Don't look for a job, look for a calling, because that's
Yes.
where you will fulfill your desires.
Yes.
So you were crunching all these numbers, but you still didn't have the fulfillment in your spirit.
No, I
You
didn't.
felt hollow, you felt empty, you felt like you weren't impacting your generation.
I wasn't. And I felt like I wasn't making a difference. And I would always pray, God, deliver me to your next place of employment, because I've always been independent. I had a mortgage, had a car note. So that was my conditional prayer. You know how we pray to God sometimes with condition. That was then. And so I worked there almost 16 and a half years. In 8 of those years, I had a Christian manager, and she just walked off the job. And I didn't know I was a chaplain back then. I was trying to provide her care, saying, what would it look like if you rethink this? But she did not like, she had a lot of morals. She was one of the few moral leaders that I knew, and she actually just walked out. She couldn't deal with it's different working in a law firm. It's
Okay.
different. And she would always tell me, Tanya, I don't think I have it in me to be that diplomatic. And so, but at first, like I told you, at the previous job, they taught me it's not what you say, it's how you say it, it's not what you do. So I took those skills to Atlanta, and it worked out for me. I was there almost 16 and a half years, and my mother got sick in 2013, and I had to be at a surgery with her. I had like 25 days put in for a week, and it was only one day was approved. So I came to Mississippi. My mother was trying to rush me back to my job. You know how they are, you need to rush back. And I would not. I said, I'm going to wait until the oncologists come around. So once the oncologists came around, then I went back, and I was called in because I just basically told them, I'll take the other 4 without pay. I didn't think it would be a problem. I would think, I didn't care about the pay
Right.
because I wanted to be there to support my mom. And so, long story short, they called me in and tried to get me to say that that was insubordinate. And I made it clear that, wanted them to walk in my shoes. Like, I knew their wives and I knew their children. I was like, so if this was your loved one, what would you have done? I tried to put it back on them. But anyway, 3 days. I always tell this story like a resurrection. 3 days, I was getting all these emails to train my replacement. And so on the 3rd day, they called me back in and said that I wasn't a good fit. And I laughed. I said, I'm not a good fit after almost 16 years. And so it was like a burden had been released.
Oh, wow.
Like, over those almost 16 years, 8 of those years were great with the Christian manager. And then I went through about 4 other managers. One was great too. She left as well. And so during that time, it was like a burden. This was in 2013. Although I was praying for God to deliver me to the next place of employment, God delivered me to seminary.
Right.
And I think
At the Emory University.
I think what happened, he had made that comfort zone uncomfortable to
So that you
push
could
me
push
into
you into your
destiny.
destiny.
And God, I know without a doubt, God closed that door. I don't regret it. I had always been independent. And after the savings probably ran out after 6 months, I was like, okay, God, what's next? But I can say God has been Jehovah Jireh, the Lord my provider,
So
on this
you've
journey.
lived in big cities like Atlanta. Compared to Belzoni, where you live now, maybe it's a city of 4,000 or 5,000 maybe, compared to Atlanta, which is 20 million. I'm sure you can see the difference every day.
Yes, I can see the difference. And what I have learned is to embrace the moment.
Okay.
So I relocated back in 2017. And the only reason I relocated back is because my mom, Belzoni, is home for her. So I relocated back to share caregiving responsibilities with my brother. And relocating back, I had a lot of anxiety about transitioning from Georgia back to Mississippi. And I would find myself always comparing my Georgia experiences to my Mississippi experiences.
Were you living in the city, Atlanta, or the
No,
outskirts?
I had lived in Dunwoody, Roswell, and finally purchased a home in Snellville. And then prior to leaving, I lived in Augusta. So the difference, Atlanta, believe it or not, Atlanta was fast paced for
Right.
me because I wasn't used to the traffic. I took MARTA to work, that's the transit system there. And if I had to drive into work, I could not. The traffic was just horrible.
Wow.
So one of the things, you don't have the traffic to me in Mississippi
In
like you
Mississippi.
have in Atlanta. So I didn't miss the traffic, but I did miss some luxuries like getting my eyebrows threaded. But now I have found places that actually thread the eyebrows. So I found myself always comparing my Mississippi experiences. If I would say this, if I was in Georgia. So I actually got convicted. Another friend had moved back to take care of her mom.
Oh.
And we actually just decided, okay, we need to embrace the moment now. It's challenging. To keep it simple, just embrace where you are.
Right.
Embrace the moment and be.
So like no high-speed Wi-Fi.
No.
Your telephone services are less efficient.
Right,
You probably don't have as many cable stations.
Right. But now I got to say, the community I grew up in, they have Dish.
Okay.
Growing up, we only had two stations,
Okay.
ABC and PBS. So our fun was watching people pass the road,
Oh wow.
a car pass. So that was entertainment. Reading books, throwing rocks, climbing trees.
The Delta is known as one of the poorest parts of the United
Yeah.
States, and it has one of the highest mortality rates in terms of death rates and life expectancy. So, give us a little intro about what you think about the health indices of the Delta. Like, are there physicians? Where do the people go for health care? Are there hospitals that you can?
There are
And
hospitals.
what has evolved over the last 30, 40 years? Has it improved? Has it stagnated? Has it reduced, regressed? So what's going on in the Delta?
Well, my hometown, when I grew up, there was a hospital. We had
Okay.
Humphreys County Memorial Hospital. Now that hospital is no longer there. And that saddens me. And so the University of Mississippi Medical Center attempted to bring a clinic there. But the problem is, how do you recruit and retain physicians? So there's a shortage on physicians. There's a shortage on nurse practitioners.
Right.
There's a shortage
Of nurses too.
on nurses as well. So my question is, what's the solution? That's my main question. How do you recruit and retain healthcare professionals? Because you do have health professionals come there, and they usually come for 5 years to get their student loans paid off. And you hear your friends' parents saying, oh, I hate she left because she was such a good OBGYN. And so the question is, how do we recruit
Keep
and
these people.
retain?
Right.
But also the flip side of that, it's not attractive
To live in the Delta.
to live. Now, for me, home is where the heart is, but having that access to health care. So you have the shortage of doctors. You don't have the access. Like even in my hometown, there's only one ambulance, which if something happens, you said about the mortality rate, if if that ambulance is on one call and someone else called, and this ambulance served the entire Humphreys County, which includes Belzoni, Midnight, Louise, and Silver City, you have to wait until they're finished with that call before they can get another call. And I want to do research on this to see how many people have passed away waiting on a ambulance.
Wow.
And sometimes they can call ambulance in from other areas, but it just depends on what the other area has going on.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the solution is, but I think that's the question we need to answer. How do we recruit and retain
Definitely.
healthcare professionals in the Mississippi Delta, because it's much needed. And even now, with going through my experience with my mother or being a caregiver, it's like pulling thread or pulling teeth to get her to Jackson, because the ambulance can only go within a certain mile radius. So we always try to come to the Yazoo City Baptist. So if she needs to be transferred out, they can transfer her out. But the thing with that, she's a dialysis patient, so usually they want to when they pick her up, but it's still the patient's choice where hospital they go to.
Right.
Usually they want to take her to Greenwood because the Yazoo City Baptist doesn't have a dialysis unit, and the Greenwood unit does. So, but my brother and I are always trying to get her to Jackson.
Wow. Why the name the Delta? What's the reason for the name?
Oh, the Delta.
Is it because it's flat? Or?
It's because it's flat. It's the soil.
Oh.
It has some of the richest fertile soil in the United States. And it's in the northeast part of the United States, between the Mississippi River and the Yazoo. Some people say Yazoo, some people say Yazoo.
Yazoo. Okay.
Yeah, Yazoo River, and it's known for its land. It's known for food.
But it's still known for poverty.
It's still known for poverty.
Some of the best land in the country.
Yes, it's still known for poverty, and there has been some improvements over the past 50 years. Because, Tunica was at one point the most poverty-stricken city in America. But the casinos came and it created jobs. It created jobs. So there has been some improvements, but there's still a lot more work to go. So you got the issue of health care, then you got poverty, and so usually people who live in the Delta is majority African Americans.
We're going to take a short break.
Okay.
And we're going to be right back. Dr. Chaplain Tanya Jefferson is going to explain more about the Delta in the next show. Don't miss it. You're going to get a little good lecture on the Delta and how to be a chaplain. God bless you in Jesus' name. Amen.